Okay. Hello, everybody. I am about to review Lady and the Tramp. I'm just going to try to change the description so it will say the correct thing. Then again, it might not let me. But okay, it says talking about COPPA made for kids option. So that's actually not that bad. Because, okay, Lady and the Tramp is probably considered something that is made for kids. This review, on the other hand, is not made for kids. So I'm going to discuss a very issues with regard to the remake of Lady and the Tramp. I got a chance to see that on the Disney Plus channel, and it was free. And I appreciate the fact that Disney allowed me to do this, and that a friend of mine allowed me to do this using their account. I'm going to now try to share this on Twitter, perhaps. Okay, so did I like it? Yeah, I did like it. It was pretty good. And yeah, I've already shared it, so all is good. And I am watching this live, although my ability to concentrate on more than one thing at a time is somewhat limited. All right. How does it compare to the old movie? I think I like the older version of Lady and the Tramp more. But to be honest, I haven't seen it in years, and I'm not prepared to make a sweeping look at everything that is slightly different in this version from the one that I saw as a child. And of course, when you're not a child and you're watching a movie that perhaps is geared toward children, it might be the case that that you just, you might be a little bit jaded because you're an adult now and you have other thoughts. So in order not to allow myself to be completely influenced by my own thinking, I did try to include my dogs in watching Lady and the Tramp. So I watched it on my Chromebook in bed, and the dogs were there. The dogs are Leo, which you can see him right there. He's the one who's closer in the picture, and then I might be making it hard for you to see, but Romy was there too. So both of these dogs started to watch the movie with me, but they did not find it interesting and they fell asleep. Now, this is probably because most of the time the dogs on screen were speaking English, and there was some barking and some yelping, but generally speaking, they did sound more or less like human beings. So that's probably why the dogs were not as impressed with this movie as they might have been had they actually noticed that there were dogs involved. Okay, now, so was this a movie made for dogs? Probably not. Was, if Disney were subjected to the same sorts of things that we on YouTube are subjected when we make a video, they probably should have been asked, was this movie made for dogs or not made for dogs? And possibly every one of their movies would have to be labeled that way, made for dogs or not made for dogs. And of course, that's kind of silly. Because obviously, when we watch a YouTube video, we sometimes are accompanied by our dogs or by our chimps or by our birds or by our small children who are under 13 years of age. And if that happens, do you know that the current terms of service on YouTube say that you are in violation of the terms if you actually allow your child under the age of 13 to watch YouTube? There's just a lot of fictionality in these rules and in these requirements. But okay, back to the movie. One thing that struck me as different from, this is a really superficial thing, and please don't take it that that's the most important thing there, but I'm just going to give you my impression. So the thing that struck me as being obviously different is that a huge percentage of the human beings in this movie were Black. Okay, I mean, it wasn't like the Black version of Carmen Jones where, where you take Carmen, except everybody's Black. And so it's okay. It's just, the actors are Black, but it's the same story, kind of. This was, some of the actors were Black, some of the actors were white, some of the actors were Asian. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't me misremembering things because I haven't seen the old one. So I did watch another lady's review, and she said, oh, about 80% of the actors were Black. And she thought it was because it was set in New Orleans. And of course, New Orleans is a very diverse place and always has been. So I can see why she would say that, and maybe it is set in New Orleans, but it's not just a question of the geographical location that the movie is set in, but also the period. So we know it's not a contemporary story. If it were a contemporary story, of course, there'd be people of all races and they'd be marrying each other and there would be no big deal about it. Jim Deere was white in the story, but Darling was Black, and they had a baby together, a beautiful baby. But the period that this is set in is a period when you used to go to the butcher to get scraps for your dog. We can't do that usually now. That's not available. This was a period where the dog catcher had a wagon that was drawn by horses. That's not normal now. There are all sorts of indications, the way the cars looked. There were cars, but they looked, I don't know, from the 1920s or 30s. I don't know exactly what period that was supposed to be, nor do I know the location. But there were some societal issues with regard to class and race that just came off as if we were in an alternate universe where things were different way back then in the 1920s or 1930s. So for instance, Darling had an aunt, and I guess that's a real character from the previous movie. Okay, so Darling is Black and her aunt's Black, but the aunt disapproves of her husband because she doesn't feel that he is an earning profession. He's a musician or artist or something like that. And so she's snooty and she looks down on him. Okay, so snootiness is a real thing, and it happens everywhere, but it's just doesn't seem like it's socially realistic in terms of what people are being snooty about. So Jim Deere and Darling live in apparently a kind of an upper class neighborhood where everybody is pretty well off, and the tramp, the stray dog, when he goes there, he's very impressed with how rich they are and how Lady's living situation is very posh, or as as my daughter's generation would say, bougie, which I think is short for bourgeoisie. But anyway, the racial prejudices of the 1920s and 1930s are not present at all in this movie. And that's fine. I understand it's a movie for children, but it doesn't have to be set way back. It could, when they did the remake, they could just set it in the present when there's a lot less, I believe, less racial prejudice. It just doesn't feel right. It's like there's something kind of socially weird about setting it in that period with that technology and with people being as open about race and interracial marriages as they are depicted as being in this story. Okay, another thing that deviates, yeah, I'm like letting that go now, and I'm suspending disbelief, and that's not going to be my whole critique. I don't think that there is any point in that. But okay, so another thing that they did was the dog catcher, I think, has a much bigger role. Again, I don't really remember exactly how it was in the original Lady and the Tramp, but he's sort of like Javert. He's obsessed with catching this particular dog, and he has this very high ideology about how dogs have to be owned, and if they're not owned, then they should be destroyed. They should be captured, they should be jailed, and if nobody wants to adopt them, if they're not quote unquote adoptable, then they should be put to death. Okay, so this is a pretty serious issue. And I'm going to talk about it very seriously now. So definitely not for children. If you are a child, switch to another channel, do something else. I'm going to be talking about really, really serious issues of life and death, and whether it's okay not to be owned by somebody, and slavery, and the PETA, and how they're after all of our animals, all of that. So I understand that these were real dogs. They looked like real dogs. Oh, and that's another kind of secondary issue. Do you remember when I did the review of The Lion King? When I did the review of The Lion King, and that was a CGI, it was all computer generated. And a lot of people were saying at the time that the reason the emotions didn't ring true is because they were trying to make these non-real lions have real emotions, which of course lions do have emotions, but it's hard for us to read the facial features of a lion. And therefore, a lot of the scenes in the remade quote unquote live action Lion King were not real, and they were not, they just didn't touch us emotionally. And so a lot of people made excuses and said, well, of course, because lions' feelings aren't the same as human feelings. And in the original Lion King, which was just a cartoon, human emotions were superimposed because it's easy to do when you're drawing. Okay, well, here's the thing. These are real dogs, okay? And the acting was excellent. So this is a thumbs up. This is saying, yeah, you did it right. We could see all the right feelings on the faces of those very real dogs. And I don't think that was all added artificially by computer technology. I think the dog trainers were able to get those emotions out of those dogs. And yes, when a human being looks at a dog's face, there's a lot that we can tell about how they're feeling, even if we're not looking at their tail and seeing whether it's wagging. So I thought it was a very emotional movie. It was quite moving. There was a scene at the end that would, is enough to bring you to tears when Jim Deere and Darling decide to adopt Tramp, and they sort of tell off the dog catcher about that. But what they say is, he does have a home. Okay. So this is really the big issue that this movie tackles. And if you want to take it seriously, that's that's a universal issue. It's not just about dogs and cats, and it's about human beings. It's actually the same issue that I tackle in Vacuum County and many other places. Is how much of yourself are you going to give away? How much of your freedom are you going to give away? Are you willing to give away in order to belong somewhere, in order to love and be loved? Okay, that's why the romance between Lady and the Tramp, if we take them as not real dogs, if for a moment we think of them as a guy and a girl, um, the romance is partially about is the tramp going to maintain his freedom, or is he going to be subjugated into a relationship where he can't just go and think only of what he wants at that given moment? He's going to have to consider his what he owes, the loyalty that he owes to Lady, and of course she has to do the same for him. So that's the issue of whether to get married or not, or even to live with somebody or not. It's not about the legal aspect of being married. It's about the commitment, and that's the commitment that human beings deal with all the time. And of course, you can make a commitment to a child that you adopt, and yes, you do make a commitment to an animal as well that you bring into your family, and you don't just get rid of a dog just because you had a baby. Most of us agree on that, although I have met people who did exactly that. You know, they had a dog and it was a higher end dog, an expensive dog, a dog with a pedigree, and they were married and they were pretty well off. And then when the baby was born, they found that they just couldn't deal with the dog. So that's a very realistic situation that has happened in real life. And yes, that has happened to some dogs. Uh, I'm not one of those people who's going to wag her finger at the people who did this. I don't think there's any point in that. What we have to ask ourselves is, when that happens, what are the options that the dog has? Okay, what options does the dog have? And should it be that if the dog is for any reason not adoptable, should the dog be put to death because of that? And by the same token, if the dog is not adoptable, should the dog live at public expense? In other words, be placed in a dog pound, which is paid for by taxes, and really not just the dog pound, but the dog catcher is living at public expense, right? So, as a libertarian, I don't see that as a solution to the stray dog problem. I actually am one of the very few people who believe that it's better to allow there to be some stray dogs in a community until or unless people are found to actually want to adopt them and take them into their home and make a commitment to them. If you will look at all my articles online, and I guess later on I will link to the articles that I'm talking about. I did write one called "The Strays of Don Shui," and one of the ways in which I was very impressed with how the people in Taiwan dealt with this. There were a lot of stray dogs, and I saw one, and that, after a few months, I saw it get adopted. But even the ones who were not adopted were not put to death. They just continued to live on college campuses and in public places where certain people chose to feed them, and they weren't living at public expense. So really, in a way, the stray dog problem is also a lot like the homeless problem. The question is, if you don't happen to have a home, if you don't happen to have a job so that you could buy a home or rent a house, or uh, make some kind of arrangement. Is that supposed to be the end of you? Should you be incarcerated because of that? Or is it okay for there to be some people who are homeless, maybe temporarily, but maybe for the rest of their life? And if they don't cause problems for other people, shouldn't we just look the other way and not cause problems for them? So it's, of course, it's great to have a job, to have a family that you belong um, to have people who care about you, whether you're a dog or a human being. Those are good things to have. I'm not putting down the bourgeois lifestyle. All I'm saying is that in addition to the possibility that, yes, you could be adopted into a home if you are a dog. Yes, you could get married. Yes, you could find a job. Uh, yes, you could, I don't know, you could win the lottery and buy your own house. All of those things are possible, but if that doesn't happen to be your present situation, should you be hounded by people whose job it is to make sure that nobody lives on the streets, that there are no dogs wandering around at all because they're a public menace and dangerous? And okay, so one of the kind of odd things in that movie was that the tramp was adopted because he saved the baby from a rat. Okay, that to me, that was the least realistic part of the story, but okay, your dog is supposed to save you from a lot of things. A rat could be one of them. The police invading your house is another. Um, but a lot of times we just adopt dogs, even though they haven't done anything particularly heroic yet or may never do. And um, yeah, in a less dramatic setting, you adopt a dog because the dog shows up and he seems nice and you have room for another dog. That's what I did with Romy. You know, Romy is the the dog in the back behind Leo. Leo gets to sleep right next to me because he was there first. And Romy, even though he's bigger and he tends to want to take over, I let him know that right now he's not top dog. He is second dog and he sleeps a little further back on my bed, but they both sleep on my bed. Okay, they both have a place, and I didn't pay for either one. So I watch Marlene McCullen's channel, and I know the slogan of adopt, don't shop, but I'm not against breeders of any kind. I understand that none of us, not even those of us who have adopted, would have any dogs or cats or birds or chimps to adopt if they weren't for breeders. So we should all thank the breeders for what they do. And it's not their fault that sometimes someone who buys a very expensive dog ends up letting that dog out on the street. The breeders did not make that happen. The only person responsible for that is the person who abandons the dog. And yeah, there was a kind of a very touching flashback to how Tramp felt. He also had a home. He also had people that he had loved, and they let him down. And so this is why at the beginning of the story, he's very bitter. And he says that human beings are not capable of loyalty. Only dogs are capable of loyalty. But really, you shouldn't trust any human because of this. Um, so, yeah. Okay. And that's kind of what a lot of people say who have been let down by employers or by relationships. Um, they're bitter, not because they didn't want to have a job or a career or a marriage. They're bitter because somebody really, really let them down. Okay, yeah. So, in the same way that I think we shouldn't hound dogs who happen to be temporarily homeless, and we shouldn't. I'm not even one of those people who think we need a dog shelter in our county. We live in a county where there was a dog shelter, and they got a lot of money. A lot of people contributed to that dog shelter. It was a not-for-profit corporation, one of those nonprofits, and the people absconded with the money. Well, I'm not saying they went to Tierra del Fuego, but anyway, they got a lot of money. And after a few years, they went bankrupt. And the individuals involved have not, I don't think, returned the money to the public that they took. And some of those individuals are still going around being involved in castrating dogs and, spaying and neutering programs. And nobody says, but hey, they're the ones who mismanaged that shelter. I don't think we need a public shelter. I don't think we need a nonprofit. I think that individual people should adopt when a dog shows up, or help the dog to find somebody else who wants to adopt, and try to look the other way if you can't adopt, and if the dog is not bothering you. Don't call the authorities on a dog if that dog is just scraping by and is not sick and is not rabid, and just let it be. Let it be. The same way that, there was a time that the only way a woman could have children is if she were married. If she were not married, those children were deemed to be illegitimate. And I'm not saying that if you can marry somebody who's nice, that you love, and start a family with that person, that you shouldn't do it. But isn't it great now that if a woman doesn't find an acceptable man, she can still have a family? That she doesn't need to have an owner. She doesn't need to have a master in order to live her life. I think it's a good thing that we do have that freedom. Again, obviously, if you can find yourself the right man as a woman, or the right woman as a man, or whatever, or if you're gay, whatever is right for you, and start a family. But it's not a good idea to say that you'd better be owned by somebody else, by something else, or else you don't have the right to exist. That would be the same as saying any dog is a bad dog unless he has a collar and a little thing that says exactly who he belongs to. And by the way, this same thing applies to having a job. It's great if you have a job with benefits and a nice income, and you go to that job and you're loyal to your employer, and you should be loyal. You should be loyal to your employer if he or she or they or it provide you with those things. You should work hard and you should be loyal. But not everybody is able to find a job. And so many people have to earn a living without an employer. They're actually more free, but I'm not going to give you an overly romanticized view of what it is to be free. Okay, in the movie Lady and the Tramp was free and Lady was a slave. You can look at it that way. And that's certainly maybe how PETA would look at it. I don't know. But Lady was loved and cared for and part of a family, and the Tramp was on his own. So I think this movie is a good movie because it dramatizes both the pros and the cons of each of those states. It's great to be free and, to look through the trash and find good food, and maybe even go to an Italian restaurant and have somebody be nice enough to serve you a very nice spaghetti meal, just because they admire you for being so free and for finding a girlfriend on your own, despite the fact that you have no owner. Okay, that's really nice. And we saw the nice side of being free. The lady saw the moon and the entire city for the first time. Well, she'd seen the moon before, I suppose, but she saw things, parts of life that she would never have seen had she remained in that backyard forever and never come out. So it's good to be free, but it's also good to be owned. And in this world, with all of the dangers that we have, I don't think that those of us who are free should cast aspersions against those who are enslaved. But I also think that those who have an owner shouldn't look down their nose at the street dog. And I think we should live and let live. And that's the takeaway that I take from Lady and the Tramp. It was a very emotionally moving movie, and I do recommend it. Thank you, Disney Plus, for letting us see it for free. I'm probably not going to subscribe to your subscription service. And I do wish you would get the FTC off our backs, because we are the tramps. Okay, you're Lady, Disney is Lady, and those of us who make content on YouTube for a nickel and a dime, we are the tramps. Don't trample us down just because we don't have a job, we don't have an employer. We still need to earn, and you shouldn't send the FTC against us to bother us under the suspicion that maybe some of your viewers are also viewing our channels. So that was my review. I see that I do not currently have any comments. Does anybody have a question or a comment? I do see that we have 3 viewers, and that's pretty good for my secondary channel. So I'll take that as encouragement. I'm going to sign off now. And the next movie that I plan to review will be the Mr. Rogers one. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to my secondary channel, and I will let you know when I have another movie review to share with you. All right, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later.